All right, we're live. Namaste. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. As usual, it's your host kushalmehra. आज थोड़ा लेट चालू किया है, so sorry about that. But time का थोड़ा problem होती है जब दूसरे देश से लोग आते हैं, so adjust करो उसके लिए. I'm really happy that I'm able to get this guest today on the podcast because I was looking forward to chatting with her now for at least a good 6 to 8 months. I wanted her on the podcast, but we were trying to figure things out. And so, without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Drishti.
Namaste. Thank you for having me here, Kushal. I'm equally pleased to be here.
All right, Drishti. So, to begin with, why don't you tell everyone a bit about yourself, and then we can get into the nitty gritty. So, go for it.
Sure. So I think a big reason of me being here is maybe where I've come from. So I grew up in Islam, or I grew up within a Muslim family. And then over the years made my journey to atheism and thereafter to the identity that I hold proudly now, and that is a Hindu identity. So and, alongside not only being proud and exploring my Hindu identity, I'm also fortunate to be the custodian or hold the responsibility of the National Hindu Student Forum here in the UK. And alongside that, I have a day job where I work in technology strategy. So that's me.
All right, cool. So let's start with obviously you come from an Islamic background. So let's start with let's divide this into three parts. All right. So part one could be your journey as a Muslim. Part two could be the part where this shit ain't making any sense for me anymore. And part three could be how you gradually discover Hinduism. So let's discover part one. So, how was hell as a child?
So I probably start with like my first memory of where this concept of hell really came into my consciousness, and I was probably around 5 or 6 years old. And up until that point, I was just at home, domestic life, etc. And suddenly, now I have to go and spend 2 hours in the evening at a place called madrasa. It's just around the corner at the mosque. It's just another mum taking the class. But I distinctly remember hating it. I remember hating it because you went there and it was really scary. You had to put the hijab on, you were put into a stuffy classroom. But the ideas there were probably the most terrifying. And I remember I was one of 3 students. So I sat on these little desks. There was three girls. And there was a lady who described to us what the hijab is. And not just what the hijab is in terms of how you have to cover and, it has to be up until your wrists and your ankles, but what are the consequences of not wearing the hijab? And I used to have really long hair back then, so this was doubly terrifying because from the age of 9, every Muslim girl, from the age of 9, or if she gets her period sooner, is expected to wear the hijab, and that is the full covering, but also change her behavior and her demeanor. And for every day that you do not wear the hijab, if you choose not to at that age, you have angels on your shoulder that are sitting and taking accounts for God, for Allah. And they are taking note they are taking note of each day that you do not wear the hijab. And the punishment is that when you die, you will be in this place called hell, where there is a whole theme park of really horrible things happening. But the one for wearing hijab is that you will be hung by your hair above a fire, a raging fire, or a big vat of oil. It was described in many ways to me. And you will hang there until every single hair is plucked out of your head and you fall into the fire. You are burnt into a crisp, and then you are reborn again and hung again for another day. So that cycle is just for one day, and that will happen over and over and over again, just for not wearing the hijab. If you do other things, there are other punishments that you will endure after this punishment is complete. But I distinctly remember being told that as a 5-6-year-old, going home and saying to my mum, "Is this true? This is really scary." My mum just had to say, "Yes, I don't know to what extent that she was taught this, but she was like, yep, you've learned it in madrasa, it must be true. See, you have to behave and you have to listen to me. And that was it. And for the next 2 years, I went to this particular institution, which was at the mosque just down the road. And ideas like that were put into my very young mind. I think the one that's most profound for me, and this is a little bit maybe worse than hell, and that is the different types of Muslims that exist in the world. So again, at this age of maybe around 6, you were taught about the different types of people, and all people are Muslim, by the way. There is no non-Muslim per se. Everyone's a type of Muslim, and there were 5. And so I won't go into too much detail, but there's the one that's the Qur'an Muslim that really tries, that's really pious and is in tune with God, in tune with Islam, a good servant, and they give their life. And you get the type of Muslim that tries, but for whatever foible, shaitan speaks to them, and they don't really quite cut the mark. And then you've got the hypocrite, who outwardly displays themselves as a Muslim, but really isn't a Muslim. But even if the world believes them, Allah knows, because Allah knows everything. And then you've got people like you, the kafir, who are not born into Islam, who are misguided. But hopefully, because you might have a Muslim friend, you might be guided to the truth, and you too will have the opportunity to embrace Islam. If you don't, you'll go to hell, because that's where you belong. And if you don't make it to Islam, well, that's maybe God's will. It was a story that we were fed. But the worst punishment is for people like me now, I guess, for the apostate, for those that are born into Islam or embrace Islam at some point and then choose to leave. There is no redemption, there is no forgiveness, there is no mercy for an apostate. Not only are you condemned to hell, but it's legally okay for you to be killed here and now on earth. Because not only have you left Islam, you are a bad example. You should not exist. So these were ideas that, when you put into the mind of a child, are quite powerful with how you see the world. So I think I'd just like to extend on your question of what was my notion of hell. It extended to not just the theoretical of what will happen after I die, but also what could happen if I step out of line.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting. You know what? I want to touch upon a latest article written by Anand Ranganathan in the Swarajya magazine. And it was a very interesting article where he basically studies the Quran. And what he's trying to say is that actually, in the sense that what we call a good Muslim these days is someone who doesn't take the Quran too seriously. Actually, in the ironical way, according to the Quran, the good Muslim, according to us, is a bad Muslim. And the bad Muslim, according to the Quran, is what the good Muslim is the bad Muslim. So it was very, very interesting. And he uses different verses from the Quran to basically make his point. It's a very long article. It's, I think, around 4,000. It's like an essay, but it was very well written. So now I wanted to ask you another story from one of our conversations a while ago, which was something to do with which foot you.
Yes.
What the hell is that? Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, so I'll give you a bit of color to that one. So after I went to this madrasa that I just mentioned, I actually enrolled into a more organized madrasa. And your lessons are broken down into different subjects. So you have Quran, which you read, but you don't ever really understand, to your point. But you have another subject called akhlaq, which is good manners, good conduct, and how you as a Muslim should conduct yourself, both privately and publicly. And in there, you are taught absolutely everything. Absolutely everything. So you are taught what will get you good points, so sawab. You are taught what will get you bad points. You are also taught what you shouldn't do, but will not incur any consequence, as it were, but you lose out on good points. And so this story is funny because some of the things that you should do and shouldn't do are actually how you should eat, but also how you should enter the toilet. So when you go to the bathroom, you must enter with your left foot. And when you leave, you must leave with your right foot. And that is, there's this notion of the right is the clean side, even when you eat, right? You should eat with your right hand, not with your left hand. But I guess what's striking about this story is not only are you taught that, but there's this culture that pervaded my experience in of what makes a pious Muslim, what makes a good Muslim. And so when I was at madrasa, or even when we had a program at mosque and I'd go in, there'd be a lady who would stand at the door, and she would just like peer and she'd just watch your feet, right? Do you enter with your right foot naturally? Oh, sorry, do you enter with your left foot naturally? You can see I was a bad one. Do you enter with your left foot naturally? Do you take a moment to hesitate before you choose the right foot? Or actually, do you go in completely ignorant? And she'd silently be making judgment about what your upbringing is like, whether she needs to go talk to your parents, but also she'd bring it up in front of everyone at madrasa when you next go on Saturday. So there's this culture of how you represent yourself within the Muslim circle itself was a really big thing when I was growing up. And it went to small things like that.
Yeah, I mean, if I was in your position, just for annoying the shit out of Allah, I would like just take the other foot out. I mean, that's just me being an asshole, I guess, but that's just me.
There's a whole book on it, actually. So I grew up in Shia Islam, and in Shia Islam, there's this notion of taqleed, that you have to declare allegiance to a marja, right? So somebody who interprets the Quran and the hadith for you. And at the time, and I think it still is the case, it's Agha Sistani, who is situated in Iraq, and he's written a book called A Code of Practice for Muslims in the West. And in there, you'll find detail about, what, not just what foot to enter things with, but, how to conduct business. Can a man shake a woman's hand? Can a woman who is married shake a man's hand? What type of washing do you have to do after the first night of marriage? It's got everything detailed in there. No, absolutely. It describes it in all in detail, but you have to live by that if you want to be a good Muslim. Just follow the rules.
Yeah, you know what? I remember, I want to recommend this book for everybody who's going to watch this and listen to it later on too. There is a very good book written by Arun Shori called The World of Fatwas.
Okay.
Everyone read that damn book. All he did was he basically went to the Deobandi, the Barelvis, and the different branches or the ulemas in India, and he just started reading the Q&A they get and the answers they give. There is a freaking question for every damn thing. Literally, from how to step out of the bathroom to how to do this or how to do that. I mean, some of the questions they've asked, I mean, I think I've put some of them on my Facebook page. I'm going to have to, dig it up someday and I'm going to reshare it. I mean, it was a 400, 500 page book written by Arun Shori, one of the most well researched books. And I was laughing throughout it all the time. I was like, oh my God. I mean, when, it is times at that, times like these when you remember the George Carlin set, that famous 10-minute set where George Carlin basically says, religion is bullshit. And so if there ever was a reason for religion is bullshit, it was that. But now let us go into the second phase. So when was that moment in your life when you started questioning one thing is you're young and you say, I'm not going to do that, this is too much work for a young kid. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. I'm talking about you actually intellectually trying to question it, having problems with the claims within Islam, and then coming to a point where one day you say, you know what, I can't be a Muslim anymore. So can you share a bit of that?
Sure. And this is probably the longest section, actually, because it took me a number of years, I guess, to not just explore this space, but I think the biggest thing that held me back was fear. Fear of what if I'm wrong? What if I'm doomed to eternal damnation? And also the consequences from my family and from the community, which were thrust upon me as we'll go through it. So to, I guess, maybe tie a thread to what we were just discussing, I think this really goes to the externalizing nature of religion, and particularly within Islam. You want to outsource everything because you don't want to think about it. There's a story that came to mind when you were describing that I remember actually listening to a Maulana saying within a majlis. And I must have been like 10 or something. And it's a story that exists in every culture. It's a story of like, there's a man in a sinking boat, let's say, and he's like, oh God, save me, save me. And, I don't know, someone comes by on a jet ski and they say, let me help you. And he's like, no, 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 Allah will save me. I don't need you. And they go away. And, he says, oh God, save me, save me. And time again, different sources of help come. But this person is adamant that they want a miracle. And, only then will they be saved. And so obviously they drown, they die in the storm on this boat with a hole. And they get to heaven and they say to God, or they say to Allah, I asked you for help. I'm a good Muslim. Why didn't you help me? And Allah says to them, this is how the story was told to me, but Allah says to them, I sent so many forms of help. Could you not use your mind and accept those forms of help? That was me helping. And it's a funny story. It's one that people know. It's one that people laugh at. But I think that actually had a profound effect on me, in that we ought to be using our brains. And this is probably a little bit later on my journey. But why is it that we outsource everything? A Muslim will laugh at the idea of horoscopes and say, oh, only God will determine what is true. But at the same time, they will happily do things like istikhara for simple things like buying a mobile phone, for big decisions about, should I apply for this job? Should I get married? Should I not? My own father did that. He did istikhara to determine whether he should travel to go and look for his second wife. And istikhara, just to explain for the listeners what it is it's setting an intention of what you aim to, or asking a question, holding the Quran, opening the Quran, reading the passage that the page is opened upon, and then determining whether something is a good decision to make or not. So for me, that whole idea of, well, even if there is a God, I've been given a brain, why can't I use it, was definitely a driving force for me. Why is it that everything should be told to me? Things should make logical sense. And on this, I think there were two key ideas. So one thing that plagued me as a child was, can God see me everywhere? You get taught all these qualities of God, right? God is all knowing, God is all powerful, God is all loving. In Islam's case, not really the case, but God has all these, is all powerful. And as a kid, you do things that are wrong and you wonder, can God see this? What's going to happen? I'm above the age of 9 now. So, this is all going to count in my bank balance. Oh my God, I'm a bad person. And this notion of paranoia sets in. And you try and explore ways to escape this paranoia. So that was definitely something that would fill up a lot of my time as a child. But the question, I think, that was the cornerstone that really plagued me growing up was, how can you know the truth? If you have been born into Islam, how can you know Islam is the real deal? How can you know it's true if you haven't explored everything else? There's loads of isms in the world. There's lots of non-isms in the world. Why can't you go and explore them? And only once you've explored them can you come back and say Islam is true. But if you go and explore them with your Islamic hat, how will you ever truly know them? And I remember being 10, 11 and posing these questions, not just to my madrasa teachers, but I was passed on to mullahs and maulanas. And, the response that would always come back is like, these are good questions, beta. But there are only some questions that you can ask. And the ones that reaffirm your faith. So you wanting to know Islam is the real deal is good. But you wanting to step outside and look at Islam in another way, not good. You cannot have this notion of doubt. Think about the shame you'll bring upon your family. That was how it's first put on to me. As I got deeper down this rabbit hole, it was put forward to me in a way that, don't you bring shame upon your family. Think of the consequences. Think about what will happen to your mom and dad. And there was almost a threatening tone that would come through, to the point where my dad just turned around at one point and said, you're not allowed to go and see XYZ. You're not allowed to go and have these extra question sessions, because he knew it was impacting his reputation within the community. So, my exploration was curbed. My mom took it differently. She reported my passport as stolen, got me a new passport. My parents were divorced, and sent me off to Iran for a month so that I could go and ask all of these questions and have them answered. So at the age of 11, I went with a group of people into Iran to learn more about Islam and to, in my mom's words, make me a good Muslim. It clearly didn't work, but she tried.
Yeah, I guess it did not work. Oh, damn, you sucked as a Muslim, I guess.
Yeah, and you know, like part of it was the whole, you know, I don't want to wake up at 6 a.m. or 4 a.m. and do fajr. Part of it is, you know, why do you fast and all of these questions, but that's a side note in the reality. Um, there, there came a point continuously and repetitively or consistently that you could ask questions, but there was a sense of everyone you ask was being blocked. Like there was only so far that they were willing to go. After that point, they disassociated from you because you were dangerous. You know, maybe Shaitan was speaking to me or to you if you asked too many questions, but not only will people stop questioning with you, they'll stop talking to you, they'll disassociate with you. And, you know, in some ways you were ostracized. I think the next part where I really found that breath of fresh air was probably when I was 17 years old and I decided to study philosophy for my A-levels. That's probably the next time where I was like, wow, I can actually move beyond religion and explore something new. Because up until then it was, you know, Islam, and then at school, Buddhism, Christianity, etc., and all these other notions of isms. And in the UK, I have to say they're not taught very well. In that Buddhism is taught as a religion with set practices rather than, I guess, the philosophy that it really is.
So I wanted to ask you this question. You know, I mean, we know each other for a while, but uh, for the audiences who are going to watch this, so why don't you call yourself an ex-Muslim? Because here's the interesting part. Even when you were not exploring Hinduism, you never called yourself an ex-Muslim, right? You never went down that lane at all. So why did you not go down that lane?
It's a good question. I guess to answer it simply, my past doesn't define me, right? It was only in the recent past that I've become massively aware of this movement of ex-Muslims, you know, who raise awareness of how to leave Islam, but also that, you know, it needs to become normalized, which, you know, is a good thing because it facilitates the movement of those that are seriously considering it. But that isn't the be all and end all to Drishti, you know? Just because I was happened to be born into a Muslim family, just because I happen to have worn the hijab for 10 years, doesn't mean that it needs to tinge my future. It doesn't need to tinge my worldview, or it doesn't define me and the future that is yet to unfold. So I think my past is a part of my identity, but it's not the sum total of it, is my simplest answer.
Cool. So I guess you're not gonna make all those ex-Muslims happy. They'll be like, cheater, cheater, हमारे साथ नहीं आई. So they can.
Maybe, but I think rather than exploring the negative, I rather explore the positive. So not just what is bad and this is, you know, this is oppressive and this is this, but actually what are alternative approaches to life? What are also alternatives in terms of how we can view life? And I know we'll come to that in part 3, but I think I'm more concerned and focused on that rather than what is not and where I've come from.
Okay, cool. Now let's get into phase 3, which for me is the most interesting and the exciting one. When did you start exploring Hinduism, or you know, Indic philosophies or dharmic darshanas in general? What was your first exposure to those ideas, or memoplexes, as I always like to call them? And what really attracted you? Because you, like you just mentioned, you know, you were very comfortable in your atheism or skepticism, whatever you want to call it. But then how did you get introduced to dharma or dharmic ideas, and what attracted you, and how did you make that gradual movement? Or was it really gradual, or it was just like, you know, this thing makes sense, I am this particular identity now? Or was it very gradual movement into the Hindu family?
So it's really interesting because I should probably start with how I viewed Hindu dharma before, right? So growing up, I went to a majority Indian school, and there was something set up called the Good Values Club. And predominantly Hindus went to it, and I was curious about it. And when anyone mentioned the word Hindu, I remember it just being like a shutter that came down on my mind. And I'd just like to color upon this. I'll tell you why. If I had a Hindu friend come home, my family would not wash the dishes. I had to go into the kitchen and I had to wash every dish that they touched 3 times to make.
Whoa,
Because,
that's like untouchability of some sort.
yes, because anything that a Hindu or an idolater, as it was put forward to me as a child, touches is impure. If I consumed anything, so if I as a Muslim consumed anything that a Hindu had prepared without gloves, or if I drank from the same cup as them, if I had any transfer via water with them, or with you, for example, I would become fundamentally impure and my prayers would not be accepted for 3 days. And whilst my family in some ways were quite liberal, that was like a non-negotiable in our household. It was okay for my dad, but it was different for me, my mother, my cousins, who were very staunch on it. And that was put upon me. So, you know, that openness to ideas actually is a really important thing, because going from Islam to atheism is hard enough. To then open your mind to something else is even harder when you are filled with these memes from a young age of impurity. So going from where, you know, I can't eat at Hindu restaurants, I can't, you know, every time a Hindu friend comes over, I've got extra work to do. It put me off socializing with people that weren't Muslim. Why would I want to wash extra dishes as a 7-8-year-old, right? So when I came to this Good Values Club and, you know, people mentioned the term Hindu or Hinduism, it was like a shutter coming down. I was like, you worship idols. That, you know, I didn't even know what it meant. And when people tried to explain, no, it's not an idol, it's the idea behind it, I was just so close-minded to it. And so through school, there are certain ideas that come about. And I think the first thing that probably attracted me was where I started to explore vegetarianism, you know, the environmental impact, the actually, who am I to take a life of an animal? Who am I? And how do I have that right? That was probably something I was exploring by 14, 15. By 16, I knew I wanted to become a vegetarian. Alas, my family did not allow it. You know, to be a Muslim, you have to eat meat once every 40 days. So that was really difficult for me. But at that point, I think I had an inkling, I'm more spiritual. I'm not really religious. But that confidence to say I'm not Muslim did not come through. And so the first bit that probably struck me was reading The Logical Problem of Evil by J.L. Mackie when I was 17, studying philosophy. And how if you take all of the qualities of God, they don't stand up with reality. You have to remove one, because if all these things about God were true, why is there evil? So something's a lie, God must be the lie. And that really, really shifted something in my brain. At the same time, not only do you look at different, I guess we would call it darshanas, but when you're studying philosophy, you look at different views of looking at the world. And there'd always be this side note of Eastern traditions. And it would literally be a side note. We are not enlightened enough to realize the truth, yada, yada, yada. There would always be that side note. And you'd always be curious, but your teachers would never know anything. And so you'd try and find out more and come up at a blank. That narrative was not defined then. And I think to some extent it's not defined still. But at the same age, when I'm 17 and I'm exploring this, I've really taken up, you know, this logical problem of evil. It's given me not just, I guess, support and I guess a sense of camaraderie in the sense of there are other people that know that this idea of God is wrong exists, but it gave me a confidence that not only is it a feeling, not only is it my experience, even if I am disowned by the community, there are others that see things like me too. You know about atheism, but it's only when you've got that intellectual rigor and people beside you that can happily reject this notion of Islam that you can say, I can do it too. And so I remember going to one of my teachers outside of school, where I was actually learning philosophy, economics, and learning more about the world after school. I remember going to my teacher there, and he was the first person I said to, in a hijab, clad in a hijab at the age of 17, I've decided I'm an atheist, and I just wanted to tell you. And it was the proudest moment like ever. And he turned around to me and said, okay, that's really, really cool. But you're an atheist because of your notion of God. What if I said to you that God didn't have to be the notion of God that you've always known? What if God, or what if, and I was a student of science, right? I was studying chemistry and biology. And he said to me, what if we could take an atom and we break it down and we get, your neutron, your protons, your electrons? What if we break them down further and break it down until we get so beyond quarks and we get to the smallest particle that you can arrive at, where you can't divide it anymore? What if that could be God? And I still remember that moment like slow motion. What if that could be God? No one ever before in my 17 years of existence had redefined the notion of God to not be this father in the sky figure. For God to be an impersonal God was just a foreign concept. And whilst I'm still slowly reeling from shock of this revelation or this notion and this idea that's just been introduced to me, he goes on further and says, or if that doesn't really, float your boat, what if we looked at not just our universe, but all the universes, and we kept on going? And what if we could look at that all of reality that we can't measure? What if that could be God? What if we redefine it and relabel it? And I think that was probably the moment where I started to open up again, to not stick at this notion of I've arrived at atheism and I don't need to question anymore. I'm a skeptic and science is everything. I think that idea, that meme, prodded me to keep exploring. At the same time, I was exploring, through this course and even at university, I was exploring Greek philosophy, where you learn about notions of ergon and eudaimonia. So these were also ideas that were forming in my mind that, each person, each being, each thing has a function. And when you fulfill your function, you flourish. You attain true happiness. And I guess that's what most of humanity is partly obsessed with, finding happiness, finding peace or bliss. And just after this course and just after having this idea introduced to me, I signed up to a subsequent course where we were exploring human nature through philosophy, through Greek and Hindu philosophy. And so I was already familiar with this idea of ergon and eudaimonia, and I was really comfortable with asking questions. And even though I was still clad in a hijab, I was, I'm undercover. I'm only waiting till I can have my freedom to tick it all off and, be an atheist. It was at that point that I started reading parts from the Mahabharata. And it was introduced to me as a treatise on humanity. It wasn't introduced to me as a religious text. And that really helped me see it openly. When you read it as a philosophy, you don't have baggage with you. And you're introduced to characters like Karna. And you're like, oh my God, I can relate to this. This status anxiety that Karna has, every teenager can relate to it. How he acts out of anger, his pain, his feeling of dejection, and how he has to find friends. Every human being at some point or another is climbing that social ladder and can relate to Karna. And here you have a philosophy that is so human, and it's filled with so much gray. It's not black and white. It's not enter the bathroom with your left foot and leave with the right foot. It's asking real questions. And the best thing about it is it doesn't give you answers. It leaves you with more questions. And probably, for someone like you, Kushal, that's a dream, right? Because you love questions and you love exploring. And for me as a young person, it was just profound. It blew my mind. How is there a tradition here that exists that has books like this or texts like this that, are more profound, longer, and more poetic than the Iliad and the Odyssey, but, go to the core of human nature? And I think that probably started me off. But still at that point, I really wasn't comfortable with this label of Hindu. I wouldn't call myself a Hindu. I was very much atheist, exploring philosophies. I I maybe fancied myself more spiritual, not really knowing what that meant, but science was at the heart of everything. And I probably carried on this journey of reading more and more. And I remember stumbling across, or actually being given, What Religion Is by Swami Vivekananda, which is a collection of lectures. And I was reading this in my first year of university. And I studied chemistry. And I was exploring the second law of thermodynamics, and that is that energy cannot be created, nor can it be destroyed. It can only be converted from one form to another. And when you're a student, sometimes you just take things at face value, or you try and explore it within the box and within the realm of science. At the same time, I'm reading this book. And in this book, at some points it was a bit lofty, at some points it was a bit difficult for me to digest. But Swami Vivekananda is talking about reincarnation. And I think there was that one moment where I was like, energy cannot be created, nor can it be destroyed. It can only be converted from one form to another. Reincarnation is just a recycling of energy and matter. When I die, what happens to me? Well, I'm going to break up into my constituent parts. I've got a whole lot of carbon. I've got a whole load of hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen. That's all going to go and be recycled in the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, etc., etc. Why can't the same apply to energy? And I think at that point, ideas and notions that I'd always written off as mumbo jumbo started coming closer to what I prided myself in, which was science. And rather than becoming two distinct subjects, they became more an approach of looking at life, or a method, a philosophy to look at life with. And I think that still informs the way I look at Hindu Dharma today, in that it's not for me an ism, it's not for me a religion, though religions do exist under this umbrella term of Hindu Dharma. It's how you approach life, and you can actually employ science. You don't have to reject science. You don't have to reject knowledge or logic. You can still use your brain and you can still flourish. So I think roughly that's probably how I went about it, going from, being Jai Shri Krishna to Jai Shri Krishna, and being able to become comfortable in how I portrayed myself, what I said, etc., came with this exploration on the side, rather than, I guess, the cultural adoption that went on alongside it.
Okay, now I actually wanted to ask you something, because someone in the live stream also asked this question. So it's actually interesting. So did you ever try to explore the Zoroastrian past, being a Shia? Did you ever try to do that?
I had no idea about it whilst I was a Shia Muslim.
Ah, cool. So basically,
Yep.
You just skipped that part.
Yeah, so I actually became aware of it later. I'd been to Iran, etc. Yeah, it's just not something that was introduced to me. Like, my world was Islam, not Islam. It was only after that point that different things started opening up to me.
So, today when somebody comes and approaches you and you say you're a Hindu now. Now, the thing with Hinduism is that, could mean multiple things to multiple people. Like in your case, your journey to Hinduism was a philosophical inquiry into the nature of the self in many ways. You were like a seeker who was seeking different routes, and you found answers. I'm not saying whether they're right or wrong, because that's not the aim of this podcast. The aim of this podcast is your journey. Now, today you are comfortable with your Hindu identity. You are someone who carries her Hindu identity very openly. Now, how do you handle someone? Let's say, like all. I'm a fierce critic of a lot of Hindu issues. I mean, I've been doing that for a long time. So if somebody came up to you, let's say, they came up with the standard, the standard stereotype of Hindus, like caste cows and curry, right? That's pretty much the standard stereotype worldwide. So how do you respond to something like that? That's what I was interested in.
Okay, so how do I respond to someone saying the Hindu identity is all to do with those three things that you've just named?
Yeah.
So I don't actually believe in bog standard answers, and I think you can understand why. It's because, I actually vehemently hate them. So for me, it's all about the individual that's in front of me. What do they connect with? What do they understand? For some people, you go down the exploration of science. For some people, you explore it as a philosophy. So for some people, you look at it from a religious perspective. One of the biggest things that I think I get is, things like arti, things like pujas, they're all mumbo jumbo. And for this is probably one that I struggled with initially. But it's one that actually can be quite beautiful because it can be so many different things to so many people. So if you take a Dvait view and you have this notion of another, of a higher power, of a different form of consciousness, that for you, arti for you can be a connection to the ultimate reality, to a different form of consciousness. And for you, it can be a form of worship. Fine. I think most people understand that because of the Abrahamic framework that, we communicate in and we learn in, etc. By virtue of speaking English. But what if, you could look at that differently and you believe in meditation, or you understand the merits and benefits of meditation, but you think arti is a whole load of hocus pocus? Well, I would just flip that on its head and say, well, why can't something like arti be a form of meditation where you take an ideal and you have a murti, but that's just to remind you of particular qualities. And when you engage in this method known as arti, you are actually reprogramming your brain. Why can't it become scientific? I want to remind myself when I look at Ganesh what the qualities of a leader are. I want to remind myself that I must build patience. I want to remind myself actually to squish my vices. And actually what I'm doing is systematically reprogramming my brain. So with each notion or with each criticism that comes about, it's not just the criticism, it's not a bog standard answer to put forward to somebody. It's actually, well, what's your problem? And, well, not what's your problem, but what's your angle? And then let me come around to you and let's explore it. And that for me feels the most earnest way to respond to such things.
Cool. Now let's jump into the National Hindu Students Forum. So can you tell everyone a bit about the National Hindu Students Forum, what it is all about, what do you guys do, and what are your future plans for the forum? Go for it.
Sure. So the National Hindu Students Forum here exists in the UK and was set up, I think, just over 27 years ago. And, with a singular vision, or with at the heart of it are what we call lovingly the 4 Ps, but that is to protect, preserve, promote, and practice Hindu Dharma. NHSF started here in the UK in London at one university, and then over the years spread to span across the country. And now we are thriving at just under half the universities in the UK, where we have local societies. So these are Hindu societies that are formed of students who hold regular activities. So this will be anything from the weekly arti to different sanskar sessions where we explore not just our identity, but explore history, explore philosophy, explore yoga, meditation. So this happens on a local level across the country, and I guess in a way forms a home away from home for many people who are traveling across the country, but also is a safe but also earnest place for us to ask those questions in those really important formative years. So when we're at university, forming who we are, asking those questions of who am I, there is a place actually to offer up that alternative narrative. And that really at a grassroots level is the function of NHSF. On a national perspective, incidentally, just a few weeks ago, we actually had an event called Cow's Curry Cast, Seeking a Hindu Identity, to really explore what it means to be Hindu in this day and age. But nationally, we run multiple events. So we will go from sports competitions to jari yoga events where we look to explore the different yogas and therefore cater to the different tastes that our students have and bring the community together, but also holds conferences and different talks across the country to explore what it means to be Hindu and accept and acknowledge that what it means to be Hindu will be different for you, will be different for me, and will be different to our friends across the country as well. In terms of what's coming up, so we're actually just about to close our year and we start again in September. So we run across the academic year with activities, and we're going into our next phase of planning where we hope to hold more collaboration. So we actually collaborated with Vicharamanthan recently. So we'll be looking to continue those in the year to come, as well as introduce more speakers to our repertoire going across the country as well.
All right, you know what? I actually just thought of this question, so I want to ask you that.
Sure.
Unfortunately, this is something that even I have struggled with when I've spoken to a lot of people in the West. I mean, I talk to people all the time, and I struggle all the time. The template that is used in the West, and to a large extent, even today in India, the template. I mean, if anybody saw my podcast with Sachin Nanda, I mean, I'm going to repeat it over here. I always use this analogy of two ships in this world. So there is the Abrahamic ship, and when I use the word Abrahamic ship, I don't necessarily mean it in a religious way. I mean it in a dual way. One is the religious, you have the Abrahamic religious template, and one is the secular humanist template, which is basically Abrahamism without the God. And it's a very binary template. You either this or that. There is no scope for leeway, or there is no flexibility at an intellectual level. I'm not talking about the societal reality. I'm talking about the intellectual level. So before someone says, oh, you have seen, you are being a bigot, no, I get it. Individuals are flexible. I'm talking about ideas here. So we are exploring two ships that are two ideas. And then you look at the idea that is represented in the dharmic sense, in the Indian idea, where there is Anekantwad of Jainism, Chatushkoti of the Buddhists, or the Upanishadic epistemology. There is a lot of flexibility in that intellectual shift where it's okay, we disagree, we know we disagree, but everybody come on the ship as long as we're not killing each other. And then we figure our shit out. And it's not that even in the ship, it's not like we are segregating each other. I can hop from one room into the other based on my flavor at that particular time in the day. So you, as the president of the National Hindu Students Forum in UK, how do you deal with this Abrahamic lens? Even when I remember living in Canada, dealing with the students in the university, the questions they would ask us were so Abrahamized, it would not make sense to me. Like I always give this example on my podcast where I say, they would ask, what is the core of your faith? Hinduism essentially has different cores in different darshanas. Now, why is this core a prerequisite? And I would ask them and they would get irritated with me. I'd be like, why am I supposed to play on your playing field? You come on my playing field and let's play here, because I'm going to lose on your field because I suck at it. I'm not going to come on your field. So yeah. You, as the president of the Hindu Students Forum in UK, because you guys are at a national level, do you face this template problem of how
Absolutely. So, it starts off at school when we're being educated. What is your book? What is your place of worship? What day do you need to go to the mandir? It goes that specific. Is it Sunday? Is it Thursday? What's your day? And it goes on further. So, when you get to university level, we believe in a soul. We don't believe in a soul. Again, this notion of soul is not equivalent to the notion of Atma, but it's the vernacular, the language that we've adopted living in this country and, growing up and being educated in English. And what I think is maybe it's arising in the consciousness, but it's still missing, is the fact that a lot of Hindu dharma and a lot of Hindu philosophy, the translation was done for us by the other, by the outsider that looked at it, not just from, not just with the, not at face value of what it is, but through an Abrahamic lens. And so when they translated Bhagavan, they translated it to God because it fit their internal narrative. So that level of consciousness is emerging, I think, in the UK, but is not prevalent. So definitely something that we face with our students. And I think there are two ways to approach it, right? One is, okay, play on that field and use the terms that common people use, because even though students use these words, internally they know it's not quite right. Internally they know their experience is different, but that experience is locked within them. And the other approach, which is I think the approach that we seek to take, is actually education. So we have initiatives like Sanskrit Word of the Month, where we take words like Bhagavan and we say, right, let's look at it. Let's break it down and let's actually introduce the true translation of the word into the student consciousness, so that when we use Bhagavan, we don't necessarily mean it as God. We can mean it as enlightened man, and we can know the different qualities that sit within it. So that is an effort and endeavor that NHSF does. And even within the literature we produce, in the speakers that we bring on board, we look to promote, I guess, linguistic hygiene, in that now is the time where not only do we need to start talking about and exploring our identity, which happens naturally at university, but when we do so, we must be accurate. And that accuracy is everything, because you can go to an interfaith forum and they'll talk about suffering. You can go to an interfaith forum and they talk about the afterlife. And these questions are just nonsensical for us. They don't really stack up and they don't make sense. But, we want to be a part of this whole, we are the same club, or we can talk about all of our religions equally club. And so we go forward, but we lack the language to be able to converse with, I guess, the Abrahamic traditions or faiths in a way whereby they'll be able to understand us and not write us off as the other. So it's coming. It's definitely something that we're very conscious of, and we endeavor to bring about via education. But it's a very much a challenge here in the UK.
Yeah, I remember when I have started doing this, I push back where everybody says, we are very tolerant. I hate it. I push back. I say I reject tolerance. I don't like tolerance. And then I say, why don't you guys believe in mutual respect? And I have seen this. The biggest resistance, and you guys are going to get the shock, comes from neo-atheists. They hate the concept of mutual respect. I don't know why. They're like, no, tolerance. I was like, why? Why not mutual respect?
Because somebody is stupid, I'm guessing.
Oh, no. And I get so many messages on Facebook privately and emails from neo-atheists who just can't wrap their head around the concept of mutual respect. And you know why they can't wrap it around? Because they are Abrahamic. And they are so mentally Abrahamized. They don't get it. When I say mutual respect, it doesn't mean unconditional respect. It is respect when it is mutual. The key word in mutual respect is mutual. If A respects B, B respects A. It is not one-sided. It is, multiple sides. Both sides believe in it. And in that case, an Abrahamic religion can never believe in mutual respect. They will always believe in tolerance, because that's all they can provide you. But, somebody in the live chat, another very good question was asked. So this is about... do overseas Hindus who have converted by free will, or who have, I don't like the word converted, who have adopted the Hindu dharmic lifestyle, do they feel any connection to India, just like the Jews everywhere feel connected to Israel? So do you feel connected to India, Drishti?
Okay, so there was a lot that you just said there, and I want to address your previous point in just a second. But to answer this question, so something really interesting growing up was that when I would question Islam, and I was quite bold, right? Not only did I go around asking questions, I would challenge my father about why we had to do things. Why does Salman Rushdie need a fatwa on his head? Why can't we just accept that it's a book that exists and he's written? He would always come back with this notion of, we have been Muslim for 5 generations, my father, his father, and so on and so forth. And I always used to ask the question, what happened to the 6th? What was he? And it was never answered. That question always hung unanswered in the air. And recently I did a bit of research into this. And so my ancestry is Gujarati. And I didn't know this because my parents grew up in Africa, or my father grew up in Africa, my mother grew up in the north of England. And for the longest amount of time, we didn't call ourselves Indian, even though we so evidently were. The food was a fusion of African and Indian, so I was a very confused child. Let's just put it that way. But when I started exploring Hindu dharma, I started exploring India. I backpacked for 5 weeks, and I felt so much where there was a cultural, I guess, if you have the veneer of Islam and you have the anti-cultural nature of Islam that plagues the religion, underneath it, you have the Indian culture that sits underneath it. And that Indian culture is a very Hindu culture. Notions like you shouldn't put books on the floor. If you drop a book, you pick it up and kiss it. These sorts of things were there. They were there. So there was this notion of Islam, but there was also, this underlying culture. Don't swing your feet when you're sitting, your mother's life is reduced. All of these things were common between me and my Hindu friends as a young child. So there was that sense of familiarity, though I didn't know it. But to go back to this point, I've been plagued with what happened to the Sikhs. So when you do a bit of research into what was happening a few generations ago, a few hundred years ago in both Gujarat and in Kutch, there was actually a Brahmin priest that was thrown out of a mandir for whatever reason, who converted to Islam, converted to Shia Islam, and then went around converting village after village after village after village. So not only did I culturally feel connected to India, actually, even within my ancestry would have been Hindu at some point and was converted to Islam.
Cool. So you wanted to talk about the mutual respect aspect? Go for that.
Yeah. So I think what I wanted to touch upon is that here in the UK, and I think moreover, we as Hindus are so accepting. We're almost too accepting, right? Because somebody can say, I believe in XYZ, I believe that elephants are pink. And as a Hindu, you'd be like, there must be a pink elephant somewhere. That's his belief. I'm not going to criticize it. We'll accept it. Whereas we don't truly appreciate that the other does not accept us. And this notion of tolerance is actually quite powerful. Like, why do we settle for tolerance has always intrigued me. We say things like, we're all the same, all paths lead to the same truth. There are different views of looking at the truth. And that may be true within the Hindu view, right? All the different darshan will ultimately lead to the truth. But within Islam, no. Even between Sunnis and Shias, no. If you are not on the chosen select path, and that obviously is the path that you've been born into and have studied for, you are doomed to hell. There is no second chance. There is no other truth. There is only one truth. And so the Muslim will tolerate the Hindu, or maybe they don't tolerate the Hindu because you can't even eat you can't even eat the same food or prepared by them. Yet we are very accepting. We are very, very accepting. And I think there's almost something that we need to wake up to, that we accept, but we are not accepted. So when people say toleration, what does that truly mean? I think that's a really powerful idea that once it comes into your consciousness, you start pondering on this exclusive nature of the Abrahamic traditions.
True. And you know what? I'm always going to push back. I have a problem with two concepts. One is the concept of tolerance. And through tolerance stems this bullshit concept of one-sided harmony. So, you see women, news anchors and cops in New Zealand dressing up like Darth Vader's female version. And it annoys the shit out of me. Because you know what? I always say this, if harmony is when a Muslim plays Holi and a Hindu celebrates Eid. That's harmony. Harmony is not when a female wears a hijab or a niqab and goes on TV and virtue signals and says, look how we are tolerant. And then when the Prime Minister of New Zealand goes to a mosque, the guy says, sister, I want to convert you to Islam. Please welcome. I mean, what the hell? This is one-sided harmony, and societies that believe in tolerance can only produce one-sided harmony. And that's the problem. And I've always said that. So I don't know what your views are on that, but it really annoyed me that when I saw Western women donning the niqab and saying, look how tolerant we are. We are so kind-hearted. Look at those poor Muslims. We feel for them.
And it's happened before. So it's not only happened here, but when there was the Women's March in the US, I think there were images of people putting the US flag on as the hijab as well. And it irritates me as well. And it irritates me because I don't think most people realize what it's like wearing the hijab. You do not have that experience. You do not know what it's like for a young girl, whether it's by choice or whether you're forced. You do not fundamentally know what existence is like within that. You do not know how it curbs every single freedom that you've known, or there are some freedoms that you do not even end up knowing because you are covered. So I think there's a fundamental lack of understanding that pervades these sorts of actions. And to your point of the whole, I want to convert you, well, that comes back to the acceptance versus tolerance. From a very young age, you're taught in Islam, if you convert someone, you've got a direct ticket to heaven. Everyone's on that ship, buddy. Everyone's going to try and convert you. In fact, it happened to me at university when I would argue, or not argue, but I would explore Islam with Muslims then. And I was like, I'm a Hindu. They would again try and convert me. They'd be like, why do you know so much about Islam? And everyone's always looking for that golden ticket. So whilst you may accept someone and may not want to preach to them or convert them, this notion of conversion I don't really see as existing within the Hindu mind at all. We don't go and convert. It exists within the Abrahamic traditions. Everyone's trying to pull you into the kingdom of God or into Darul Islam. But we as the Hindus are quite naive to that. We as non-Muslims and non-Christians are quite naive to that notion.
Yeah, and I find that a genuine problem, and it's always going to be a problem. And I guess thanks to the internet now, and thanks to a lot of people like you or voices like Sachin in UK, and there are many intelligent voices in America and now in India too. And we are trying to push back intellectually. Always remember, no violence. Nobody advocates violence here. We are trying to push back intellectually, and I think we need to force these people who are Abrahamized in their brain, and we need to force them to reject tolerance and accept the plural way, the Hindu way of plurality, of multiplicity of viewpoints, and how create that samanvay, to use the right word in Sanskrit, that samanvay of different kinds of thoughts, and how we manage that balance and how we maintain that equilibrium in this process is very important. So we've touched the 1 hour mark, guys. So I guess it's time to wrap things up, because it's a little late for you guys in India. But I've really enjoyed talking to Drishti. She is one of the bright ones out there who's holding the torch of dharma in the UK, and I'm really glad that I got to talk to her and ask her so many questions. And this is not going to be the last time we're going to have a conversation. So here's the thing: if you want to ask more questions to her, how about this? You guys can email me the questions you actually have for Drishti, and you can actually also go to the website of the National Hindu Students Forum. You can actually email Drishti. You can share your views. If there are any questions you want to ask directly, I've left the link to the National Hindu Students Forum in the description of the podcast. So go there, visit their website, check out what they do. It's actually kind of cool, And it's nice to see how the Hindus are different from us, because, us Hindus in India, we sometimes lose our identity because we take it for granted most of the time. So Drishti, thanks a lot for coming on the podcast, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
All right, guys. Take care. Namaste. Good night.